At 5:32 in the evening on January 31st, Nancy Guthrie left her home in Tucson, Arizona, climbing into an Uber headed to her daughter Annie's house for dinner and games with the family. At 9:48 p.m., she was dropped back off at home. But before we go any further into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. This case has gripped people from every corner of the globe, and we want to hear from you. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we cover cases like this one every single week. Now, let's get back to Nancy Guthrie. The garage door opened and it closed 2 minutes later. That was the last verifiable, peaceful moment in Nancy Guthrie's life. What happened after that garage door shut is the question that the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and the entire country have been trying to answer for over 2 months. And as of today, it remains unanswered. She was reported missing the next day, around noon, after she failed to show up at a friend's house to watch an online church service. Authorities executed what they initially framed as a search and rescue, but their suspicions shifted almost immediately. Based on clues at the scene, homicide investigators were swiftly called onto the case. This was not a woman who wandered off. Something had happened inside that house in the early morning hours of February 1st, and whatever it was, it had been planned. The Pima County Sheriff laid out a chilling timestamp that investigators keep returning to. At 1:47 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera disconnected. In that single detail, a camera going dark in the dead of night would become one of the most important threads in the entire investigation, because that camera didn't just stop working. Someone made sure it stopped working. Neighbors began reporting something that nobody initially connected. Their Ring cameras showed suspicious gaps from that same night, histories that were simply not available. The FBI started going door to door asking about it, and multiple neighbors confirmed that agents had asked them about a suspected internet service disruption across the Catalina Foothills neighborhood on February 1st. An antenna-like device spotted in the pocket of a figure captured on surveillance footage had already raised serious questions about whether the suspect was carrying a signal jammer, a device capable of blinding every wireless camera on the street simultaneously. This wasn't someone who broke in on impulse. This was someone who studied the neighborhood's digital blind spots and then exploited them. When the FBI joined the investigation in the days following Nancy's disappearance, they brought with them the full weight of a multi-agency apparatus: forensic analysts, surveillance experts, canine units, and investigators from U.S. Customs and Border Protection and search and rescue teams. They immediately flagged Nancy Guthrie as a vulnerable adult, a woman who had difficulty walking, carried a pacemaker, and needed daily medication for a heart condition. Every hour that passed without finding her made her medical situation more precarious. The clock wasn't just a metaphor, it was a biological reality. In the early days, FBI canines were back at Nancy's home on Wednesday night, working in the dark, following every scent trail they could find, while Savannah Guthrie released an emotional video pleading for her mother's return, addressing whoever had taken her directly. We live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know without a doubt that she is alive and that you have her, Savannah said alongside her 2 siblings. They were asking for proof of life. They never received it. Within days, ransom notes began arriving. TMZ, local Tucson TV stations, and other outlets received letters demanding payment in cryptocurrency, in Bitcoin, for Nancy's return. The FBI took the notes seriously, coordinating with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, but declined to confirm whether the notes came from whoever actually had her. One note, reviewed by multiple outlets, contained a detail that had not been made public: the location of Nancy Guthrie's Apple Watch. It also included 2 deadlines, February 5th and February 9th. Both deadlines passed. No payment was confirmed. No communication followed. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell said that the Bureau's guidance to the family was clear: without proof of life, do not pay. It will never end, she said, describing the FBI's position. Without confirmation that Nancy was alive, any ransom payment could be going to the wrong person entirely. That calculation proved correct in at least one case. A Southern California man was charged with sending a fake ransom demand via text message, the FBI confirming he was trying to profit from the situation with no connection whatsoever to Nancy's disappearance. The investigation was already being complicated by opportunists, and investigators had to filter the genuine from the fraudulent in real time, while a missing 84-year-old woman grew weaker somewhere they couldn't find her. Then came February 10th, and everything shifted. FBI Director Kash Patel released 4 black-and-white images on X, surveillance photographs pulled from Nancy Guthrie's Nest doorbell camera showing a masked armed intruder outside her home in the early morning hours of February 1st. The release was coordinated with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and it was the most significant moment in the investigation since the disappearance itself. The Nest camera itself had gone missing after the abduction, physically taken or destroyed, but the FBI agents had partnered directly with Google, which owns Nest, and recovered the data from the device's cloud storage. What they got back was grainy, infrared, recorded in the dead of night, and absolutely damning. The footage showed an individual walking up to Guthrie's front porch, slumped forward, wearing a backpack, gloves, and a balaclava, carrying what appeared to be a gun. A second video showed the person attempting to block the camera with a gloved hand, then walking off the porch into the garden and grabbing foliage to place in front of the lens. Patel confirmed the intruder had also tried to knock the camera off the wall with light taps before resorting to covering the lens, and that despite all of it, the data had been successfully recovered. He also noted the gun was holstered in an unusual position, near the center of the waist, near the groin, suggesting someone either uncomfortable with firearms or deliberately trying to conceal the weapon under clothing. But then investigators noticed something that reframed the entire case. In one of the still images released by the FBI, the suspect appears at Nancy's front door without his backpack and without his gun holster. A source confirmed to CNN this photo was captured on a completely different day, before February 1st. Because sources familiar with the investigation told ABC News that the masked suspect appeared at Nancy Guthrie's front door on at least one occasion prior to the night she went missing. He had been there before. He had stood on her porch and watched. CNN's Ed Lavandera noted that this revelation might explain why investigators appeared so focused on the weeks before the abduction. And it answered the question everyone had been asking. Was this random? The answer was almost certainly no. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer told Newsweek that the suspect was highly identifiable from the footage. The eyebrows, the mustache, the way he attires himself, the pinky ring he wears. The FBI described him as male, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches, average build, wearing dark clothing, black gloves, and a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, a backpack sold exclusively under Walmart's private label brand. The FBI began working directly with Walmart to gather purchasing information, trying to trace how many of that specific pack had been sold, when, and where. Investigators also believed the clothing and face mask may have been purchased at Walmart, though the sheriff noted those items were not exclusively available there. Every piece of his outfit became a lead. Every purchase was a thread that could unravel into a name. The scale of the FBI response at this stage was staggering. Up to 100 agents and analysts were working the case simultaneously, with 4 detectives and a sergeant from the Pima County Sheriff's Office embedded directly inside an FBI task force, stationed at the Bureau's Tucson field office. And Coffin-Daffer called it the polar opposite of a cold case, a red-hot investigation working every actionable lead around the clock. Law enforcement also widened their physical search beyond Nancy's property. FBI agents recovered a pair of black gloves approximately 2 miles from the home and submitted them for DNA testing. Investigators collected 16 gloves in various areas near the house. Most were discarded by investigators combing the scene, but the pair that appeared to generically match those worn by the suspect in the doorbell footage was sent to a lab for analysis. Meanwhile, law enforcement seized a gray Range Rover from the parking lot of a nearby Culver's restaurant, towing it away for examination. And analysts were also reviewing surveillance footage of an unidentified vehicle captured on a Ring camera roughly 2.5 miles from Nancy's home at 2:36 in the morning on February 1st, cross-referencing it against hundreds of thousands of vehicles on Tucson roads that night. On February 13th, investigators confirmed they had found DNA at Guthrie's property that did not belong to her or anyone close to her. The sheriff's department did not disclose where on the property it was found. That same evening, a federal court-authorized search warrant was executed at a residence near Guthrie's home. More than a dozen vehicles converged on the area, including SWAT and forensic teams. Authorities questioned one man, but released him after determining he was not the kidnapper. Officials said he fully cooperated. It was a moment of controlled intensity. Every resource deployed, no arrest made. The investigation was churning without producing a break. When the DNA from the gloves came back, the result was a dead end. It did not match any samples in the FBI's CODIS database, the nationwide repository of DNA profiles from convicted offenders and crime scene evidence. It also did not match the DNA recovered from Guthrie's property. The sheriff noted that one of the gloves was eventually connected to an employee at a local restaurant near the neighborhood, though that person was cleared as a suspect. 16 gloves, weeks of testing, and nothing usable. The investigation pressed on. Sources close to the investigation told CBS News there was growing concern that the DNA found inside the home might not yield a usable profile for comparison, that the sample could be too degraded, too mixed, or too partial to submit effectively to CODIS. The Pima County Sheriff's Department's contracted lab in Florida was still analyzing the samples and had not reached a conclusion, but investigators weren't ready to accept a dead end. They turned to a more powerful tool. The FBI confirmed it was deploying investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, to test DNA found on the glove discovered 2 miles from Nancy's home and other samples found inside the house. Genetic genealogy capitalizes on the massive popularity of consumer DNA testing services. Even if the suspect has never personally submitted a sample to Ancestry or 23andMe, a biological relative may have, and that relative's profile can be used to build a family tree, narrowing the suspect pool down from millions to dozens, and eventually to a single name. CNN's John Miller explained the implication. There's also the familial DNA route that they're going down that could bring them to a suspect's family, and that at least puts you a traceable number of degrees, potentially in the single digits, to who it points to. Forensic genealogist C.C. Moore, who has helped solve more than 300 cases using this technology, pointed to a case she personally cracked involving the murder of a 12-year-old girl whose killer was identified decades later after DNA from the scene allowed her to build out a family tree. That investigation, cold for 30 years, it moved in a matter of hours once the right biological evidence was available. She applied the same logic to Nancy Guthrie's case, and she was direct about what she believed. If a viable profile exists from the actual kidnapper, he will be found. But Moore also introduced a theory that expanded the investigation's geography entirely. She had to be held somewhere, she said. That place she is being or was held is the second crime scene. If investigators could identify a vehicle, a property, or even an object carrying both Nancy's DNA and that of the person who took her, Moore believed the case could move from inference to identification almost overnight. The house was one crime scene. Wherever Nancy was taken was another. And that second location, wherever it exists, may still hold the answer. Yet the Guthrie family's own statement to local Tucson media pointed to 3 specific windows of time they believed were critical: January 11th, January 24th, and the early morning hours of February 1st. Prior to the abduction, a masked individual made an unsettling appearance at Nancy's residence. The exact date remained uncertain, but it may have been as far back as January 11th. The individual stood in front of the house, exhibiting suspicious behavior, with no discernible immediate purpose. 3 weeks of surveillance, 3 weeks of watching, of learning the rhythms of her life, when she came home, when the cameras could be blinded, when the back gate was unlocked, and which flower pots on the patio were heavy enough to hold a door open while he worked. Federal investigators also secured video from the Uber ride Nancy took on the evening of January 31st. The driver handed over all footage from inside the car to the FBI. Investigators found nothing notable in the footage. Additional surveillance cameras installed at Nancy's home, one fastened to a fence covering the back of the house, another showing the driveway and front garage, captured footage of family members, landscapers, and pool workers stretching back weeks before the kidnapping. None of it produced a suspect. The investigation was comprehensive and methodical, and it kept hitting walls. CNN's John Miller, the network's chief law enforcement analyst, raised the possibility that the entire event may have begun as something other than a planned kidnapping. There's always the possibility that this was some kind of planned home invasion that went completely sideways and was re-engineered into being a kidnap for ransom because the suspect's opportunities had shifted, he said. The key denominator here is the blood outside the front door, which offers a strong suggestion that, whatever type of crime it started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. He also posed a question that no one has been able to answer. Could someone come up with a ransom note to disguise a home invasion, where the victim may have been seriously injured to salvage their crime? If the ransom notes were a cover story rather than a genuine demand, it changes every calculation law enforcement has made about who they're looking for and why. Multiple news outlets reported that the FBI reduced the number of personnel physically in Tucson and relocated its command post to Phoenix. To some, it looked like the case was going cold. Miller pushed back hard on that interpretation, calling it nowhere near a cold case, and describing the relocation as practical rather than symbolic, a reorganization consistent with the long arc of complex criminal investigations, not an abandonment of the search. The Pima County Sheriff's Department issued a statement. This remains an active investigation and will continue until Nancy Guthrie is located or all leads have been exhausted. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Lance Leasing told CBS News the extended timeline was deeply concerning. It becomes much harder to keep the investigation going, yet keep it current and fight for new leads. But he allowed for the possibility that the silence from law enforcement meant something was moving beneath the surface. I'd like to be hopeful that the silence is because they're on to something. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer raised a question that has haunted the investigation from the start: whether the person in that doorbell footage acted alone. Normally, people who abduct people need help. They need somebody to handle the person. They need somebody where they're taking the person to help care for that person if indeed they wanted to keep them alive. She leaned toward multiple perpetrators, but acknowledged a lone actor couldn't be ruled out. Former FBI agent Johnny Grusing offered a different angle entirely, that this may have been personal. He argued that given the sprawling residential layout of the Catalina foothills, the odds of a random criminal targeting Nancy Guthrie by chance were low. He pointed to the blood found on the front porch and down the driveway as evidence that the interaction began at the door, suggesting the suspect may have lured Nancy outside rather than forcing his way in. The suspect might have been there because he had a personal grievance against Guthrie, he said. Someone who knew her, someone with a reason, someone who had been building toward that night for weeks. 2 months into the investigation, the Guthrie family, having held back their reward intentionally, waiting for the moment when tips were beginning to dwindle, announced a $1 million reward for information leading directly to Nancy's recovery. And combined with the FBI's $100,000 and an additional $102,500 from the 88 crime program, the total reward pool reached over $1.2 million. Miller noted that the family's strategy was deliberate: deploy the reward money at the moment it would generate the most impact, and that investigators considered many of the new leads that followed to be credible enough to actively pursue. Cece Moore said the case looks stuck until the moment it is not. That, she argued, is the nature of genetic genealogy. An investigation can sit at a standstill for months and then move in hours once the right biological evidence surfaces. The decisive clue may be waiting somewhere investigators have not yet publicly named. Miller echoed that philosophy, and adding that sometimes the passage of time itself is an investigative tool. You have to be open to the idea of bringing in a fresh set of eyes, because you can get investigative blindness staring at the same evidence in the same case file for so long that something might be looking straight back at you that you don't see. 2 months, over 30,000 tips, hundreds of agents, DNA from inside the house and outside on the street, a suspect's face captured on camera, a backpack traced to a single retailer, a signal jammer theory, 3 suspicious dates, a man who visited her porch before he took her, ransom notes that stopped communicating, and an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and a heart condition who has not been seen since the garage door closed at 9:50 at night on January 31st. As it stands, there is no confirmed suspect, and no established motive and no verified account of where Nancy Guthrie is. Tips continue to arrive. The DNA is still being processed, the FBI is still working, and somewhere in Tucson, or beyond it, a man who stood on Nancy Guthrie's porch and watched her home for weeks before he took her is still out there. Nancy Guthrie deserves justice, and she deserves to be found. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, then you already know why we do what we do here. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we are not letting this case go. We will be back with every new development as it breaks. Share this video, send it to someone who needs to see it, because the more eyes on this case, the better the chances that Nancy comes home. We'll see you in the next one.